May 24th, 2003, Wenzhou, Zhejiang Province, China. Late evening. Two patrol officers are wrapping up a routine shift in the Lucheng district when a call comes through dispatch. A neighbor has filed a complaint about a bicycle parked illegally near a residential building on Dong'an Road. It's blocking the entrance to the building. The officers are asked to go and have the owner move it. That is the entire assignment. Move a bicycle. They park, walk to the building, and knock on the door of the ground floor apartment. A young man opens it, 20 years old, thin, average height, completely unremarkable, the kind of face you pass 100 times on a city street and never once retain. He is holding a knife. Behind him, on the floor of the apartment, there is a human body. He is in the process of dismembering it. He doesn't run. He doesn't try to close the door. He doesn't say anything. He stands there, holding the knife, looking at the two officers with an expression of total calm. They draw their weapons and order him down. He complies without resistance, lowers himself to the floor, and allows himself to be handcuffed. No struggle, no words. Complete cooperation. They walk him out of the building. Press cameras are already on the street. Someone has called it in. The flashbulbs go off. Chen Yongfeng looks directly at the lenses, and he smiles. Not the panicked grimace of a man who understands he is finished. A quiet, composed, almost relaxed smile. The kind of expression you might wear leaving a meeting that went reasonably well. That photograph will appear on the front page of every major newspaper in Zhejiang Province the following morning, and it will be the image that defines this case in the public memory for years afterward. What investigators find over the next 48 hours brings the city to a standstill. Chen identifies 4 locations across Wenzhou where he has been disposing of remains, a stretch of riverbank, 2 sites on waste ground within the Lucheng district, and a 4th concealed point. Forensic teams work those locations over several days. From the water and the ground, they recover 29 evidence bags containing 229 separate fragments of human remains belonging to 9 different people. The 10th victim, the man whose body was found in the apartment, is Wenzhou, a migrant scrap collector who had come to Wenzhou from another province to earn enough money to send something home. 10 victims, 85 days, a custom-built dismemberment table constructed by Chen himself, a vessel designed specifically to collect blood, a homemade electric shock device he had assembled from sourced components, 4 disposal sites he had surveyed and selected before he killed anyone. The entirety of this infrastructure was in place before the first murder. Chen Yongfeng did not lose control one night and spiral. He made a decision, built the tools to act on it, and ran a system for nearly 3 months before a misparked bicycle ended everything. His name was Chen Yongfeng. The Chinese press called him the demon killer of Qingtian. He was 19 years old when he committed his first murder. This is the full account of what he did, why he did it, and what his case exposed about the city that surrounded him, and never noticed a thing. Chen Yongfeng was born in 1983 in Huangdakan Village, Jizhai Township, Qingtian County, Zhejiang Province. Qingtian is a mountainous rural area in the eastern interior of China, the kind of place where the terrain is too steep and the soil too poor for productive farming, and where the local economy had for generations run on one thing: people leaving. Families in Qingtian survived on remittances sent back by relatives who had gone to the cities. Leaving wasn't ambition. It was the only available plan. Chen attended primary school and completed 5 years of education. That was the full extent of his formal schooling. After that, he worked manual labor, beating raw cotton to stuff mattresses and quilts, cutting grass along roadsides, taking whatever physical work was available for daily pay. These were not jobs that led anywhere. They were ways to get through the week. For several years in his adolescence and early adulthood, that was the entire structure of his life. In early 2003, at 19 years old, he left Qingtian and traveled to Wenzhou. Wenzhou in 2003 was one of the most economically active cities in all of China. It had grown explosively through the 1990s on the back of light manufacturing, shoes, lighters, electrical components, garments, and it drew hundreds of thousands of internal migrants every year who came looking for work. The city was wealthy, fast-moving, and deeply stratified. The people who owned the factories and the trading companies lived in a version of Wenzhou that was prosperous and modern. The people who collected the waste those businesses produced lived in a different city entirely, unregistered, untracked, occupying the margins of a place that had no formal record of their existence. Chen entered that second Wenzhou. He rented a room in the Lucheng district, one of the older residential neighborhoods of the city, and began working as a scrap collector. The work involved walking routes through the district, buying discarded metal, plastic, cardboard, and glass from households and small businesses, loading it onto a cart, and selling it to recycling middlemen at fixed low prices. On a good day, you might clear 30 or 40 yuan. On a bad day, less. There were hundreds of other collectors working the same routes, competing for the same material, all of them operating in the same cash-only, off-the-books economy that left no trace in any official system. Cash was the entire financial infrastructure of this world. The collectors had no bank accounts, no formal employment contracts, and no registration in Wenzhou's administrative systems. The money they earned, they carried on their person because there was nowhere else to put it. This was understood by everyone in the community as simply the way things worked. It was also understood, if you were paying attention, as a structural vulnerability. Every man on those routes was carrying his savings in his pocket, and Chen Yongfeng, in the weeks after he arrived in Wenzhou, was paying very close attention. What separates Chen Yongfeng's case from most crimes driven by financial desperation is not the scale of what he did, but the degree of preparation that preceded it. This was not a man who attacked someone in a moment of rage and then improvised a cover-up. The evidence recovered from his apartments made clear that Chen had made a deliberate decision to begin killing, and had then systematically acquired and constructed everything he needed before he murdered anyone. The list of items found across his 2 rented rooms in the Lucheng district included a standard axe, a fruit knife, a butcher's knife, and an iron hammer. Beyond those, investigators found a homemade electric shock device that Chen had assembled himself from sourced components. Functional, tested, ready to use. And beyond the weapons, they found something that stopped investigators when they first encountered it. A custom-built wooden table fitted with a drainage groove, constructed specifically for the dismemberment of bodies. Alongside it, a vessel designed to collect blood during that process. Heavy-duty bags and rope purchased in advance. All of it in place, all of it ready. He had rented 2 separate apartments in the Lucheng district, one on Putaopeng Road, one on Donggan Road, and had identified 4 specific locations across the city for the disposal of remains before he had any remains to dispose of. Those sites required physical reconnaissance. He visited them, assessed them, decided they would work, and filed them away. None of this was assembled in a hurry. The construction of the table alone required time, materials, and sustained intention. The homemade shock device required sourcing electrical components and understanding enough about basic circuitry to make something that functioned. All of this happened in the first weeks after Chen arrived in Wenzhou. He had been in the city less than a month before his preparation was complete. The court that later tried him would return to this point repeatedly, because it was the most legally significant element of the entire case. It is difficult to argue diminished capacity or loss of control for a crime that required this much advance work. A person acting impulsively does not build a drainage table. A person in psychological crisis does not conduct site surveys for 4 disposal locations before the first body exists. Chen Yongfeng was 19 years old, had 5 years of schooling, and had built a functional criminal infrastructure from scratch in under 4 weeks. February 28, 2003. Chen had been in Wenzhou for approximately 1 month. His preparation was complete. That day, he approached a man he had met at one of the informal gathering points in the Lucheng district, the second-hand goods market where collectors traded and talked. He spent enough time with the man to establish the minimal sense of familiarity that would make an invitation plausible, then brought him back to the apartment on Putaopeng Road under some pretense the man found acceptable. Inside, he killed him. He used the table and the tools he had prepared, packaged the remains, and transported them to one of the 4 sites he had already selected. He returned home. He had the man's money. The financial logic of what followed was mechanical. The average amount taken from each victim was just over 1,000 yuan, roughly $120 at the 2003 exchange rate. For a scrap collector in Wenzhou, that was weeks of earnings. For Chen, it was the interval before the next killing. When the money ran low, he went back to the market, identified someone, established enough contact to get them a loan, and repeated the process. That cycle, spend down, return, select, kill, drove the entire sequence across the 85 days that followed. The profile of every victim was consistent. They were all male. They were all migrant scrap collectors working the same district. They were all men Chen had encountered enough times to establish a surface-level trust. Not friendship, not real familiarity, just the mutual recognition that passes between people who do the same work in the same area. That was sufficient. They followed him because he was one of them. They had no reason not to. Between February 28th and May 24th, 2003, 85 days, Chen Yongfeng killed 10 people. The pace was not constant. In the early weeks, the intervals between killings were longer, matching roughly to how quickly he exhausted the money taken from the previous victim. As the weeks passed, the intervals shortened. By May, he was killing more frequently. Investigators were not able to establish precise dates for each intermediate killing from the available court record, but the arc is clear from the financial and forensic evidence. Slower at first, faster toward the end. The first killing, February 28, 2003, Putaopeng Road apartment. The 10th killing, May 24, 2003, Wang Wenzhou, Donghan Road apartment. The same evening the officers came about the bicycle. Throughout the entire period, Chen continued living a visible life in the district. He collected scrap during the day. He appeared at the markets. He was seen by neighbors, by traders, by the people he was about to kill, and the people he had already killed beside. Nobody connected the disappearances. Nobody noticed a pattern. In the community of migrant scrap collectors, men moved constantly, between routes, between cities, back to their home provinces without warning. When someone stopped appearing on their usual circuit, the most natural interpretation was that they had moved on. 9 men disappeared from one district of one city over less than 3 months. Not one of those disappearances triggered a linked investigation. Not one was treated as potentially connected to any other. The system had no mechanism for it, because the system had no record that these men existed in Wenzhou in the first place. The end came not through investigative work, not through a tip-off, and not through any detection of the pattern that had been building since February. It came because Wang Wenzhou had left his bicycle parked outside the Donghan Road building in a spot that blocked the entrance. A neighbor called to complain. Officers were dispatched to have it moved. That is the operational reality of how this ended. 3 months of undetected killing, 10 victims, an entire prepared infrastructure, and what stopped it was a bicycle complaint on a Saturday evening. The officers who responded had no reason to expect anything. They knocked. Chen opened the door with a knife in his hand and a body on the floor. He was detained on the spot, without resistance, without flight, and without any attempt to explain or minimize what was directly visible behind him. He was formally placed in custody on May 25, 2003. On June 20, 2003, the Wenzhou Municipal Procuratorate approved his formal arrest on charges of intentional homicide. The smile at the moment of arrest has never been officially explained, because Chen never offered an explanation for it. What can be said is what it was not. It was not the expression of a man who had been caught doing something he believed was wrong and feared punishment. It read, in the photographs that circulated across China the following morning, as something closer to release, the particular composure of a person who has been operating under sustained, invisible pressure for a long time and no longer has to. The recovery operation that followed the arrest was large-scale and methodical. Chen identified the 4 disposal sites during initial questioning, and forensic teams worked them over several days. The sites included a section of riverbank, 2 locations on waste ground within the Lucheng district, and a 4th point not publicly identified in available records. From those 4 locations, investigators recovered 29 evidence bags containing 229 separate bone and tissue fragments, the remains of 9 victims. The 10th, Wang Wenzhou, had been found at the scene. Identifying the 9 was complicated. The degree of dismemberment was extreme, and some of the remains had spent weeks in water or ground. Identification ultimately came through a combination of forensic analysis and cross-referencing with missing persons reports filed in other provinces, reports submitted by families who had stopped receiving money or contact from men who had gone to Wenzhou to work. The financial evidence was clean. 10,032 yuan found on Chen at the time of arrest, records from the victims' families and acquaintances confirming approximate amounts each man had been carrying. The match was direct. The tools recovered from both apartments, the axe, the knives, the hammer, the homemade shock device, the dismemberment table, the blood vessel, the bags and rope, were catalogued in full and formed the core of the prosecution's argument for premeditation. The homemade shock device attracted particular attention during the proceedings. Constructing a functional electrical device requires sourcing specific components, understanding basic circuitry, and building something that actually works. It is not assembled on impulse. The prosecution argued, and the court agreed, that its presence alongside the custom-built table and the pre-selected disposal sites made the case for premeditated, organized criminal intent as clearly as evidence can. The trial of Chen Yongfeng opened at the Wenzhou Intermediate People's Court on November 17, 2003. The public proceedings attracted heavy media coverage. By then, the basic facts were known. What the trial added was the specific legal argument on each side, and one moment that nobody in the courtroom appears to have anticipated. Chen initially waived his right to legal representation. The court, as required under Chinese criminal procedure for capital cases, appointed a defense attorney on his behalf, a lawyer named Bao Jianrong. What happened next was the most striking single moment of the entire trial. Chen Yongfeng stood up and retracted every statement he had made during the investigation, not selectively, completely. His new account was this: Wenzhou, the 10th victim, already dead, had been responsible for everything. According to Chen's courtroom version, Wang had approached him, paid him, and asked him to help stage the appearances of murders. Wang had supplied the tools. Wang had killed the other 9 men. Chen had merely assisted in some undefined capacity. The prosecution dismantled this in a single exchange. Witnesses confirmed that Chen Yongfeng and Wang Wenzhou had no prior relationship of any kind. They had met once at a market on the day of the killing. There was no history between them, no financial arrangement, no partnership. Wang Wenzhou was a scrap collector from outside Wenzhou who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The court found nothing in Chen's courtroom account credible. Defense attorney Bao Jianrong did not pursue his client's version. He shifted to a psychiatric argument. The nature of the crimes, the methods, the specialized equipment, he argued, indicated that no mentally healthy person could have planned and executed this. He also raised the childhood episode of meningitis as a possible basis for neurological impairment. The prosecution's response was methodical. Chen spoke clearly and coherently throughout proceedings. His investigative account before the courtroom reversal had been logically organized and internally consistent. He had operated for nearly 3 months across 2 apartments and 4 disposal sites without a detectable error. He had built functional equipment from sourced materials. He had conducted pre-operational reconnaissance before the first killing. None of this was consistent with diminished mental function. The court rejected the request for psychiatric evaluation. On December 5, 2003, Chen Yongfeng was convicted on 10 counts of intentional homicide and sentenced to death. The civil judgment additionally held him liable for compensation to the victims' families, amounts covering funeral and related costs that significantly exceeded the 10,000 yuan he had taken from the men he killed. In the public record of this case, the 10 men Chen Yongfeng killed are largely nameless. The only victim whose name appears consistently in available documentation is Wang Wenzhou, the 10th, because his identity was established at the scene. The other 9 are recorded as migrant scrap collectors, men aged roughly between their 20s and 40s, all of whom had come to Wenzhou from other provinces in search of work. Their names, if recovered during the investigation, were not reported in the available press coverage or court records. This is not a documentation failure. It is a direct reflection of who these men were within the administrative structure of Wenzhou in 2003. They were unregistered residents. They carried no official presence in the city's systems. When they stopped appearing on their routes, the most natural assumption for anyone around them was movement. To another city, to another job, home. 9 separate disappearances in one district over less than 3 months, and not a single linked inquiry was raised. Wang Wenzhou came to Wenzhou from another province. He worked a scrap collection route in the Lucheng district. On May 24, 2003, he met Chen Yongfeng at a market, accepted an invitation to an apartment on Donghan Road, and was killed there. His bicycle was left outside. A neighbor complained about it. 2 officers came to have it moved. That is the full arc of his documented presence in Wenzhou. One afternoon, one meeting, one parked bicycle that, by pure chance, ended something that 9 previous deaths had not. The families of some of the victims appeared at the civil proceedings to seek compensation for burial costs. The fact that those costs exceeded the total Chen had stolen across all 10 killings says something about the arithmetic of what he actually gained. He killed 10 people and accumulated net a sum that a factory worker in the same city could have earned in 3 or 4 months of ordinary employment. Chen Yongfeng does not fit the frameworks that coverage of serial killers tends to rely on. There is no documented history of childhood abuse in the court record, no established pattern of prior violence, no psychiatric treatment, no early warning signs reported by family or community, no account of escalating behavioral indicators in his adolescence. The one medical fact the defense introduced at trial was the childhood episode of meningitis, a serious illness, but one the court found entirely insufficient to explain what followed. What the record shows is a young man who assessed his situation with a specific kind of cold logic and then acted on it in a way most people would be incapable of, regardless of how they reasoned. He needed money. Scrap collection wasn't producing enough. The men around him carried cash, could be isolated, and would not be missed quickly. He built the required tools, identified the required locations, established the required social access, and began. When the money from one killing ran low, he went back to the market and selected the next person. There was no escalation of method recorded in the evidence, no indication that the killings became something he pursued for its own sake beyond the financial return. Every killing served the same function, replenishing funds, and the intervals between them tracked, broadly, with how quickly he spent what he had taken. The smile at arrest has attracted persistent attention because it sits uneasily against that purely instrumental profile. A rational actor running a purely financial operation has no obvious reason to smile when it ends in arrest. Chen never explained it, and none of the available sources report him offering any account of his own emotional state at that moment. What can be said with certainty is what the record shows. 19 years old, 5th grade education, 1 month in a new city, and a complete operational system built from nothing. 2 apartments, 4 disposal sites, custom equipment, and a social methodology for identifying and isolating victims. The court called it premeditated. The evidence does not suggest a more generous interpretation. The arrest of Chen Yongfeng took place during a period that criminologists studying China have since described as an unusual concentration of high-profile serial murder cases. In 2003 alone, several individuals responsible for killings on an extreme scale were arrested or brought to trial across the country. Yang Xinhai operated across 4 provinces between 1999 and 2003, entering rural homes at night and killing entire families. He was ultimately linked to 67 murders and was arrested in November 2003, the same year as Chen. Huang Yong lured teenage boys to his home in Henan Province between 2001 and 2003 and killed 17 of them. He was also arrested in 2003. These cases, combined with Chen's, produced an extraordinary period of public attention to violent crime in China and significant pressure on law enforcement to explain what had allowed such cases to develop undetected for so long. For Chen's case, the answer to that question was structural rather than investigative. 9 people disappeared from a single urban district over less than 3 months, and no linked inquiry was raised, not because the police were negligent in any conventional sense, but because the administrative systems of Chinese cities in 2003 had no mechanism for tracking the movements of unregistered internal migrants. The hukou system tied a person's legal identity to their place of origin, not their current city of residence. Men without Wenzhou household registration did not appear in local employment records, residential registers, or social welfare databases. When they stopped appearing on their routes, there was nothing in the system to register their absence as an anomaly requiring investigation. Chen Yongfeng did not choose his victims randomly. He chose them because they occupied the precise administrative blind spot where a disappearance would produce the minimum possible institutional response. Whether or not he understood this in those formal terms, the pattern of his selections demonstrates that he understood it in practice. Chen Yongfeng was sentenced to death on December 5, 2003. Under Chinese law, death sentences require appellate review before execution, and in cases of this scale and public visibility, that review proceeded without reversal. On April 7, 2004, Chen Yongfeng was executed in Wenzhou alongside a group of other condemned prisoners from Zhejiang province. A brief notice in state media confirmed the execution. He was 20 years old. From the date of his first killing on February 28, 2003, to the date of his execution on April 7, 2004, 438 days. The method of execution was not publicly disclosed. In China in 2004, executions were carried out by shooting, or, in an increasing number of cases, by lethal injection, as the country was transitioning between the two methods during that period. Which was used in Chen's case is not established in available public records. His family in Qingtian gave no public statements. No appeals for clemency appear in the record. No organizations became involved in his case. The legal process moved from arrest to execution in under 12 months, a pace that, by the standards of capital cases in any legal system, was notable for its speed. The court had made its determination. The appeal process confirmed it. The sentence was carried out. When the evidence bags were cataloged and the proceedings closed, the case reduced to a set of numbers that don't become easier to sit with, regardless of how many times you read them. 85 days, 10 lives, 229 fragments across 4 locations, 10,032 yuan, 1 bicycle blocking a doorway. The bicycle is the detail that stays, not because it is dramatic, but because of what it implies about the 85 days that preceded it. 9 disappearances in one district, 2 functioning apartments, a custom-built table, a blood collection vessel, dozens of night trips to disposal sites across the city. 3 months of operation with no detection, no linked inquiry, no alert raised, not because Chen Yongfeng was a criminal genius, but because the men he killed existed in the administrative reality of Wenzhou in 2003, as if they were not there at all. They worked in the city. They spent money in the city. They were murdered in the city. And the city had no system for knowing any of it. A bicycle changed that. Not detective work, not surveillance, not pattern analysis. A neighbor's complaint about a blocked entrance on an ordinary Saturday evening. That is what ended it. China's internal migration infrastructure has changed significantly in the 2 decades since this case. The hukou system has been progressively reformed. Urban registration has become more accessible for long-term migrant residents. Social systems have expanded. Whether those changes would have caught this case earlier is impossible to determine with certainty. What is certain is that the specific condition that allowed 9 men to vanish from one district of one city without generating a single connected inquiry, the condition of complete administrative invisibility, no longer exists in quite the same form. Chen Yongfeng spent 19 years in one of the poorest rural areas of eastern China, arrived in one of its wealthiest cities, and decided that the most efficient way to close the distance between those 2 positions was to kill the people nearest to him on the economic ladder. That decision does not become more comprehensible by calling him a monster. It becomes more comprehensible and more unsettling when you understand exactly how rational it was, exactly how thoroughly he prepared for it, and exactly how long the city around him failed to notice. 10 people came to Wenzhou to work. They carried their savings in their pockets because there was nowhere else to put them. They trusted a man who was one of them, because that is what you do when you have nothing else to rely on. Their names are mostly gone from the record. His is not.